India.
We begin with one of the most sweeping and lasting communications blackouts of the internet age, India's attempt to silence the people of Kashmir. When Prime Minister Narendra Modi made good on his election promise to revoke Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, he swept away what little remained of Kashmiri autonomy. The region, officially called Jammu and Kashmir in India, is now set to come under complete control of the government in New Delhi. More Indian troops have flooded in, and communications have been cut off. A near total shutdown of the internet, mobile phones, and landlines. A blackout that is now into its fourth week. Two distinct news narratives have since emerged. Indian outlets, particularly its plethora of 24-hour TV news channels, say the situation in Kashmir is under control and there has been little resistance. Then there are the handful of Indian outlets and numerous international news organizations, including this one, saying that that is definitely not the case. Our starting point this week is the Kashmiri capital, Srinagar. A region locked down. Millions of people with their communications blacked out. Kashmir was already heavily militarized when the Indian government sent in 10,000 more troops in early August because of what it called an imminent terrorist threat. It turns out the Modi government had other reasons. Days later, immediately after imposing a communications blackout, New Delhi announced it was stripping Kashmir of its autonomy. Over the next few days, we had our producer in Srinagar film reactions from Kashmiris. In this age of instant communication, it took us 2.5 weeks to get the video, because with no internet, no connection to the outside world, our producer had to fly to New Delhi to upload it. The interviews he conducted, however, are in no way dated, because very little has changed.
पहले तो मुझे समझ नहीं आ रहा ये गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की तरफ से कश्मीर में वॉर है कि क्या है तो इन्होंने हर कोई सर्विस यहाँ सस्पेंड कर दी है अब ये कहते हैं नहीं जी कश्मीर में normalcy है कौन सी normalcy है
It's a complete blackout. That means there is no network, there are no broadband services. It's complete like blackout right now and you're not able to connect to anyone.
रिश्तेदार को पूछते थे फ़ोन करके पता ही नहीं कौन जिंदा है मर गया अब घर से मैं निकलूँ मेरे घर वालों को पता ही नहीं वापस आएगा नहीं आएगा फ़ोन करते तो पता लगता बिल्कुल ज़िंदगी खराब होकर बैठी है
No government blocks internet access as frequently as India's does. 159 times over a 3-year period. Far more than Pakistan, Syria, Turkey, Iran, and Egypt combined. According to the Delhi-based Software Freedom Legal Center, more than half of India's regional internet blackouts have been imposed on Kashmir, including 55 this year alone. What is unprecedented, however, is the scope of this one and the duration, 3.5 weeks and counting.
They've been cut off for hours sometimes a couple of days. Even if they cut off broadband, there have been other ways of getting through. This is the first time that everything has been cut off. Landlines, mobile phones, mobile internet, broadband, Wi-Fi, there's nothing.
So earlier what used to happen is when there was an encounter between Pakistan-sponsored terrorists and the J&K police or the army, they used to shut internet of that particular district or that particular area. But this time around, considering that there could be some kind of violence, internet was shut down, phones were shut down, and it's been more than 3 weeks now. So yes, the severity certainly is massive and never seen before.
Ever since 1947, when India and Pakistan gained their independence from Britain, Kashmir has been disputed territory. In 1950, India agreed to amend its constitution to grant the part of Kashmir that it administers, India's only Muslim-majority state, a degree of autonomy.
One nation, one constitution.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has consistently appealed to nationalists by promising to rescind that part of the constitution, Article 370, and allow India to take full control of Kashmir. Modi's brand of Hindu nationalism gets turbocharged on the Indian airwaves by hundreds of 24-hour TV news channels, most of which have echoed the government's narrative on this story, that the situation in Kashmir is calm and peaceful.
आज आपको कश्मीर में अमन की सबसे शानदार, सबसे खूबसूरत तस्वीर दिखाएंगे.
Normal has become the key word, a kind of mantra.
Normalcy returns to the streets.
जम्मू में हालात नॉर्मल होने के साथ ही ईद की तैयारियां भी जो है शुरू हो गई हैं.
और जम्मू कश्मीर में अनुच्छेद 370 हटने के बाद तेजी से हालात सामान्य हो रहे हैं.
If you are a reporter for a TV news channel and you've been given very specific details by your channel, by your editors of what you can and cannot show, you're not obviously going to dig for stories further than that. Some of our colleagues spoke to these TV journalists and asked them if they had been to several of the areas of Srinagar that we were visiting. And they all said no. So if you're not visiting more than a few specific areas, you're obviously not going to report on protests. You're going to say that everything is normal.
Indian media from the time of independence was part of a nation-building project. And Kashmir has been part of India's nation-building exercise all through these years. Over the last few years, nationalism, patriotism, militarism, they're all seen as one and the same. If you're not with us, you're against us.
Indian news channels do not limit their with us or against us approach to Indians. They use the same tactic against other news organizations trying to cover Kashmir. International ones like the New York Times, Al Jazeera, and Britain's BBC.
The BBC, it seems to be, has been simply caught red-handed. Someone should report it to Boris Johnson, who should lock up the entire management of the BBC in jail for shaming them yet again.
4 days into the blackout, the BBC, Reuters, and Al Jazeera all reported that security forces in Srinagar fired tear gas and rifle pellets at crowds of protesters. The Modi government, through its Ministry of Home Affairs, called that story fabricated. After the BBC posted video of the unrest, complete with the sound of gunfire, the government changed its tune, but only partially, admitting there had been a small protest involving miscreants, but that no shots had been fired.
The Indian government at the time decided to call it's a fake video. The BBC stood by their story. They said this is a real video of a real protest from Srinagar. A lot of the Indian media, especially the electronic media, especially the TV media, was saying everything is normal in Kashmir for consumption of the Indian masses primarily, because that's what the messaging from the state is. Look, we have done this and there is no resistance to this, which is just the opposite, as that video showed.
New York Times or the Washington Post or the BBC or the Al Jazeera will immediately show you visuals of violence, of stone pelting, or people being killed, death, mayhem. It's not like that on the ground. Since August 5th decision to revoke Article 370, there hasn't been a single death due to any of the so-called human rights violations of the security forces. So how can any international publication, be it in TV or print, justify their reportage?
The short answer is because we don't really know who's been killed or how many. That's what communications blackouts do. They stop the full story from getting out. What few images the world has seen, Kashmiris protesting, hospitalized, blinded by pellet fire, put the lie to the Modi government's normal narrative, the one parroted by so many news outlets falling over themselves to support a government in New Delhi they are supposed to hold to account.
It's not just Kashmir. If you trace the history of what these channels have been saying on significant issues in the last few years, they seem to have become mouthpieces of the government, its ideology, its strategy. They're not any longer sort of independent observation watchdogs or information givers.
You'll often hear Indians describe themselves as the world's largest democracy. You'll hear that from government. You'll hear that from media. Given the way the Modi government is behaving and the way the media have basically lined up behind the government, the fourth estate, is this really the world's largest democracy? Is it acting like one?
For Kashmiris, it has never acted as a democracy. And I choose my words carefully. It's a bewilderingly diverse country, the size of a continent. Numerically, it has been the world's largest democracy. But I once read an Indian writer, a very good Indian writer, described India as the world's greatest experiment in democracy. But the writer also said that sadly, the world's greatest experiment in democracy is failing.